Hey, welcome to another episode of McDoodles for Your Noodle. This one is going to go over a certain anemia that's pretty important. But first, to start, what do you think the most common nutritional disorder in the world is? You probably can tell from the title of this production, but iron deficiency.
Oh my God!
The signs and symptoms related to iron deficiency anemia are mostly related to inadequate hemoglobin synthesis. I don't know why I'm on such a meme kick today as I'm editing this, but I am. Anyway, so you've got iron and it combines with protoporphyrin and that gives you the heme group. Inadequate hemoglobin synthesis leads to problems with your red blood cell transportation of oxygen. And so obviously that's a bad thing. So the signs and symptoms are related to this anemia source. So your body is going to keep an iron balance between what is stored and what is absorbed. So the absorption is going to happen in the proximal duodenum, and that's going to be regulated. But we don't have a regulated pathway for excretion. However, we do have daily losses of 1 to 2 milligrams shed in our mucosal and skin cells every day. The United States normal diet has mostly heme, so you'll see in the future we're going to talk a little bit about different sources of iron from non-heme sources and heme sources. The US normal diet, we're mostly getting heme iron. Okay, and that is going to come from animal products. The remainder is from inorganic iron from vegetables. What is the average total body iron content? It is up to 6 grams in healthy males and only 2.5 grams in healthy females for a couple of reasons. The fact that they have their periods and they can lose blood and therefore iron that way. Also, when they're pregnant, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, they're using up more iron. So most of that total body iron content is in what's called the functional compartment. So we've got 2 compartments in our bodies. The functional compartment is obviously has a function. So it's being used. It's in hemoglobin, it's in myoglobin, it's in catalases, it's in cytochromes. So this is the iron that is being incorporated into things that help you function. And then most of the remaining total body iron content is in storage, the storage compartment. So we've got security here. We've got ferritin. Ferritin. Okay, that's all to help you remember. We've got this security guard looking guy here. This is just a visual device to help you remember what ferritin does. And ferritin is going to tightly bind iron. Why do we want to tightly bind iron? That's because free iron in the body is... So again, a storage molecule for iron. So a lot of these guys, this ferritin is going to exist in macrophages in these tissues, the liver, the spleen, and bone marrow. Now, when the ferritin is partially degraded by lysosomes, it's going to aggregate, and these are called hemosiderin granules. So people with normal stores of iron are going to have most of it bound to ferritin. And the cell turnover of the red blood cells is going to release some of the ferritin back into the plasma. So in general, plasma ferritin levels coordinate with body stores of iron, right? So if you have low iron, what do you think ferritin is going to be? Low. So the iron that is in these hemosiderin granules, we can visualize it because it's chemically reactive and turns a blue-black when it's exposed to potassium ferrocyanide. And this is the basis for the Prussian blue stain. So I included this picture here that shows you what this looks like. So if you see a picture like this on the test, you think hemosiderin. So obviously we need iron to move fast if it's required, like if we have blood loss. And that transfer between the storage and the functional compartments is mediated by this guy, transferrin. I think it's very aptly named because he's transferring your oxygen. I hate myself.
Do you have the package?
We're going to pass it on to transferrin. And transferrin is made in the liver. And normally a third of the transferrin in our body is saturated with iron. So about 120 micrograms per deciliter of transferrin is in males and 100 micrograms per deciliter is in females. So we're transing your ferrin. We're gonna, the major function of this is to bring iron to those baby red blood cells. These are reticulocytes, so they're immature red blood cells. They need iron to move into maturity, and so they've got these high affinity receptors for transferrin, so they can take in that iron. And then when they grow old, if you remember, how long do red blood cells last in our blood? Yes, 120 days. And so when they get older, they get recycled in macrophages, and that iron can enter the system and start over again, go back to transferrin, go into new red blood cells. So the pathway in the duodenum, I mentioned earlier that we've got two forms of iron. One of them is non-heme and the other is heme. So luminal non-heme is mostly in the ferric form, so Fe3+. Shout out to Medicosis Perfectionalis. His videos are great. He has this mnemonic that ferric is hysteric, and so it can't carry oxygen. So we do not want it in this ferric form. So first, before we can use this iron, we have to reduce it. Again, an aptly named thing, ferroreductase, because we're reducing that iron from the ferric Fe3+ form to the ferrous 2+ form by ferroreductases like B cytochromes. Then that Fe2 is going to be transported across the apical membrane by the divalent metal transporter 1 or DMT1. And then at that point, the regular heme iron is going to join the pool of iron with that Fe2+. So it's got one less step. It's more easily absorbed. It's highly bioavailable. Non-heme, the bioavailability, the absorption is variable, and it's not very efficient, obviously, if we can go straight to the form that we can use. And it also can be inhibited by other substances in your diet that bind to and stabilize that ferric form, that 3+ form. So less than 5% of non-heme is absorbed. All right, so how I mentioned that our body regulates the storage of iron, the balance, and one of the ways that it does this is this guy, I think of kind of like a bouncer here, hepcidin. He's like, we're full, no one else can come in. We've got enough iron. So the way that he balances this is down regulating this ferroportin. So I've got here, please sir, may I have some more iron? And then the bouncer is mean to this little guy and he says no. So when there's systemic inflammation, your hepcidin is going to increase. The reason for this is because your body can't tell the difference between you having an infection and autoimmune disease, right? So obviously if you have an infection like bacteria and things, they need iron to do DNA synthesis spread across your body. So if we sequester this iron away, then the bacteria or whatever it is that's infecting us can't use the iron, and hopefully that will keep it from spreading. But if you have a autoimmune disease, your body doesn't know that you're not being attacked, so you're kind of screwed because you get anemia from this because your body is sequestering iron and not letting it circulate. So like type 1 diabetes is a type of autoimmune disease. You can see this in lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. Systemic inflammation is going to increase hepcidin. So we're trying to keep the iron stored. We're not trying to absorb more into the plasma. Hepcidin problems play a central role in diseases involving the metabolism of iron. So again, if we don't bring in iron, we've got chronic inflammation, increased hepcidin. Obviously, this is going to decrease the amount of hemoglobin that's able to be made, and it's going to decrease the red blood cells' capacity to carry oxygen, and that's going to create anemia. So I mentioned earlier that hepcidin downregulates ferroportin. What it does is it binds to it, and this causes the ferroportin to be endocytosed and degraded. So if we don't have that port out of the duodenal cell into the blood, obviously we're not going to absorb that iron and hold on to it. When that iron is not absorbed and it's trapped in the duodenal cell, there's this thing that I think sounds kind of gross, but it's lost with sloughing of the duodenal cells. Okay, so it's gone. We don't get it. The other thing that hepcidin does is also it suppresses iron release from macrophages. Again, that's related to trying to keep an infectious agent from getting iron and using it to spread throughout our bodies. The diseases that involve the iron metabolism problems, there can be, aside from the chronic inflammation, we've got mutations that disable this TMPRSSB that normally suppresses hepcidin when iron is low. That creates a rare form of microcytic anemia. Not sure how high yield that is. And these people fail to respond to iron therapy because the hepcidin is going crazy, suppressing the ferroportin. So it doesn't matter how much iron that you put in, it's not going to let that go into your system. It's not going to absorb it into your system. On the flip side, when hepcidin activity is inappropriate low, we've got the ferroportin going off, portal of those iron into the blood, into the blood, into the blood. We've got this thing called systemic iron overload or hemochromatosis. And that can be an inherited mutation in either the hepcidin, the ferroportin, or the hepcidin expression genes. And then secondary hemochromatosis can be from inefficient red blood cells, like in beta thalassemia major and myelodysplastic neoplasms, because basically those red blood cell babies are not getting the iron. And also there's release of erythroferrin, which inhibits hepcidin. Kind of a recap here. Once in the duodenal cell, your heme iron can go one of two ways. It can go to the blood via ferroportin. So ferroportin is going to take it from the duodenal cell and give it to transferrin, and then that transferrin, it's going to rapidly bind to it. It wants to take a ride to the bone marrow. So the bone marrow, it's delivering the iron to the immature red blood cells that need it to mature. Or it can go into storage. So you don't need to really actively produce a lot of red blood cells. You can store the iron and then you can have it when you need it if you're not getting it from your diet. So how do you get iron deficiency anemia? So number one, it can be lacking in your diet. We're not really going to see this in high resource countries like the US, but it can occur in specific groups. So either, developing country where they just don't have the resources to get iron in their diets. But also we've got infants. They can be affected because there's not enough iron in breast milk, and there's 2 times the amount of iron in cow's milk, but it's got poor bioavailability, so it's not really helpful for infants. Obviously, if you're impoverished, you can't afford the food. We've got a high resource country, but some people who can't afford good nutrition. We've also got older adults. Maybe they have dental problems. They don't have as much money. They are not eating as much meat. They're not getting as much heme form. And then obviously vegans, because the heme form, we get it from animal sources. Second kind of way you can get iron deficiency anemia is impaired absorption. We can see this in sprue where your intestines aren't really absorbing nutrients very well. And so obviously one of those nutrients that you need to get from your diet is iron. Obviously we want bioavailable iron in our diet, and that's as important as the overall content of what we're eating. For example, ascorbic acid, citric acid, amino acids, and sugars enhance the absorption of iron, while tannates, which are in tea, carbonates, oxalates, and phosphates decrease the absorption. You can also have fat malabsorption related to this, or steatorrhea, I don't know if I said that right, and chronic diarrhea, because it's just moving through quickly and your body doesn't have time to absorb it. Also, if you get a gastrectomy, like if you get gastric bypass, that decreases the acidity of the proximal duodenum, and that actually decreases the uptake of iron, and it also increases the speed that food's moving through the system. You have less opportunity for iron absorption. The third way is increased requirement. So young kids, those infants who are growing, they need more iron as they grow. Premenopausal females, and also during pregnancy, because they need iron for themselves and the baby. And then the last kind is chronic blood loss. I want to emphasize this is the most common cause of iron deficiency anemia in developed societies. Okay, so in other words, the United States, if they have iron deficiency anemia, think blood loss. So we can have an external hemorrhage, which is pretty obvious. You have some kind of trauma, you're bleeding out, you're going to lose the iron that you're bleeding, but also bleeding in the GI, urinary, and genital tracts, okay? You have to attribute iron deficiency anemia at first to gastrointestinal blood loss until proven otherwise, because you might miss a cancer because you assume the iron deficiency anemia is due to another source. Okay, so until you prove otherwise, assume it's cancer so you catch it as early as possible. Whatever the reason, iron deficiency anemia comes only when iron stores are completely depleted. Okay, so you might have some decreased serum iron and transferrin saturation, right? Because there's not as much iron to move around without anemia. In this early stage, there's increased red blood cell activity in the marrow trying to compensate. The anemia comes when it's serum iron. It's completely depleted. All right, so what is the morphology of the iron deficiency anemia? A significant diagnostic finding is the absence of that stainable iron in macrophages that I mentioned with the Prussian blue staining. You're not going to see those blue-black dots. Also, because we've got a lack of iron, and iron is a component of heme, and heme is a component of hemoglobin, and you need hemoglobin for red blood cells to carry oxygen, we're going to have a microcytic anemia. It's also going to be hypochromatic because it doesn't have that hemoglobin. And then a final characteristic feature is called poikilocytosis, which are small elongated red blood cells that are also called pencil cells. The clinical features of iron deficiency anemia are non-specific. The dominant symptoms are going to be related to whatever the underlying cause is. Okay, so if it's like normal anemia, you're pale, you're tired. If there's some kind of cancer going on, etc. Okay, so if the anemia becomes severe, though, you might see other changes like koilonychia. I don't know which way to say it. Anyway, your nails are going to turn up, so they're going to kind of be like concave on top. You can also see alopecia. You can see atrophy of the tongue and gastric mucosa, and you also can see intestinal malabsorption. Another manifestation of iron deficiency anemia is pica or pica. I don't know which way you pronounce that either. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing all of these. So pica is a craving for non-food stuff like clay, and then you've got pagophagia, craving ingredients like flour or craving ice. So these can be signs of iron deficiency anemia. And then another important thing here to be aware of is that if you have this classic triad of iron deficiency anemia, esophageal webs, and atrophic glossitis, this is a common triad of the Plummer-Vinson syndrome. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you see those things together. For the diagnosis of iron deficiency anemia, we're going to basically do this with lab studies. So obviously it's an anemia. We're going to see decreased hematocrit and decreased hemoglobin. We're going to see those morphological changes that I mentioned. So we're going to see microcytic cells. They're going to be hypochromic. We might see pencil cells. We might stain with Prussian blue, and we're not seeing those dark blue-black iron spots. We're also going to see decreased serum iron. No duh, it's decreased iron in your blood. And for this reason, we're going to see decreased ferritin, because ferritin's not going to have enough iron to hold on to. And also any iron that it could hold on to, it's going to let go of because your marrow needs it to have those mature red blood cells. We're also going to see decreased hepcidin because we are not trying to inhibit the absorption of iron into our functional compartment. And then the relationship between ferritin and transferrin, it kind of makes sense, right? So if we see decreased ferritin, that means whatever iron you have is moving around trying to get into the functional compartment. That increased transferrin, it also might just be increased TIBC. This makes sense because the less iron that there is to transport around, the more empty trucks there are going to be of transferrin in your body because they don't have any iron. So the binding capacity of transferrin is going to increase because there's not enough iron to saturate them. And then finally, treatment. So basically with treatment, most of the time, if things are nice and uncomplicated, you can just give them oral iron. That's going to increase those reticulocytes, the immature red blood cells, in 5 to 7 days. And then you're going to see a steady increase in blood count. But things are often not uncomplicated. And like I mentioned, you want to make sure that you catch cancer if it's a GI bleed. So if it's complicated, you got to address the issue that is causing the iron deficiency anemia in the first place, like chronic blood loss or diet or whatever it is. My source is our textbook, Robbins, Cotran, and Kumar, Pathologic Basis of Disease. Thanks for watching. I hope this helped. And good luck on the test and good luck studying.